Yes, that's some very good jazz to start our morning with our weekend. Good morning. I am your host, David Gregors, and this is Connect Your Audio, the Weekend Repose. The Weekend Repose is meant to be like your weekend, hopefully, is nice, relaxed. You see, we have a little different theme song for the Weekend Repose. Nice jazz. In fact, that's so nice, I may play it in its entirety at the end of the program. It's Bossa for Baden, and I'm really enjoying that. But this is a new segment or a new type of show for Connect Your Audio. During the week, we do the political analysis, but on the weekend, we're going to do this weekend repose. And during the weekend repose, I'm going to just talk about some light things. Some perhaps we discuss a film or a movie I've seen recently and how does it relate to some big concept that's going on in the news today. Perhaps we share some philosophy, talk about some philosophical things that I think are particularly relevant to what's going on. Maybe we talk about a little religion, do a little Bible study, who knows. The point is, it gets to be where we reassemble ourselves. That's the point of the weekend, right? That's the whole reason we have a 5-day work week with 2 days to ourselves so that we can reassemble ourselves, gather ourselves together, and hopefully be ready for battle for the new week. Unfortunately, we're always kind of in battle mode nowadays in these culture wars and these political wars. The battles are still raging. I keep getting these news alerts on my computer here and seeing that the legal challenges are still going on. Uh, we're still being called white supremacists on one story that just came through. It never ends. But at least for here and at least for now, the battle will be a little bit calmer, a little bit more bossa nova, and we're going to reassemble ourselves and do some light thinking and hopefully give you some ideas of some things to pursue in the future. With that, I would like to get to our discussion today, which is about a movie and a television show and how these two kind of work together. I'm not sure that anyone would think that these two would normally go together, but they kind of do in a way that I hope will be clear as we go on. Recently, I watched the Netflix television series House of Cards. Now, if you haven't seen House of Cards, you really should. And if you like politics, if you're kind of a political junkie, you definitely should watch House of Cards. Right after I watched House of Cards, I can't really understand why I did this. I think it was more of an accident. It certainly wasn't intentional, but I ended up watching the movie, the Clint Eastwood movie, Richard Jewell. And seeing these two things in parallel, or I guess back to back or consecutively, it really kind of put me in a mood of distrusting my government. I mean, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about these two things. We're going to start with Richard Jewell. And Richard Jewell, if you're not familiar with the story, he was kind of a goofy guy. And he was well known, or became well known in 1996 for his heroic actions in the Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta. So if you're not aware, I grew up in the deep South in Georgia. Atlanta was kind of our New York City. And it was a really, really big deal when Atlanta was awarded the Olympics. I think in 1991, I want to say were awarded the Olympics, or 1990, somewhere in there. But it was a really, really big deal for all of us throughout the state. I mean, it was Olympic everything. Everything had the 96 Olympics branded on it. Everybody had their hats. Everybody had their shirts. It was a really, really huge deal. And Atlanta itself underwent a massive facelift for the Olympics. And one of the things that happened was the old Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, where the Atlanta Falcons and the Atlanta Braves played. It was replaced by Turner Field, which was built right next to it. And so Turner Field was Atlanta Olympic Park or Centennial Olympic or something. I can't remember exactly what it was called, but it became Turner Field. And and that was where all the Olympic Games were held, or at least the track and field type, the main event type stuff was held right there. And then they also built this park. It's near the CNN Center, called Centennial Olympic Park, and it's where there's the torch, the everlasting flame is there. That year, 1996, Muhammad Ali lit the torch very famously, and it was a huge deal. It was a really beautiful event for our country, for the state of Georgia, and for Atlanta. And so, just after the games started on July 27th of 1996, there was this concert that was going on in Centennial Olympic Park, and there was a suspicious package spotted by Mr. Richard Jewell. Richard Jewell saw the package, he alerted the people around him, cleared the scene out, and managed to, as he was clearing the scene out, he managed to avoid the blast and didn't get injured or anything like that. And so that's the basic storyline, and we'll get more into it as we go along. But I want to tell you a little bit about Richard Jewell. You didn't know this at the time because Richard Jewell was really nobody famous. Nobody really knew who he was. But as it turns out, Richard Jewell was kind of a goofy guy. And when I say goofy, I don't mean that in a bad sense. He was very much a naive, I think, well-intentioned man. When I was in public safety, we would have called Richard Jewell a rescue Randy. I'm sure there are other names for these types of people all around, but these people are quite common within the realm of public safety, and that is that they're kind of simple. They're not they see things in a very narrow kind of lens, but what they really want is to help people, and their life aspiration is to be a paramedic or to be a firefighter, or in Richard Jewell's case, to be a police officer. And that was his obsession. That's what he always wanted to do. This is the kind of person, the Rescue Randy type was the type of person who always would come to paramedic class dressed out in their makeshift uniform, because of course they didn't work anywhere yet, but they're still dressed for the job. They've got their cargo pants on. They got their little pocket pouch. They got their trauma shears in their pocket, peeking out so everybody can see them. They got their field manual. This is the kind of person who goes and takes their work radio with them to Walmart just in case something were to happen. They would be ready and they would be able to call it in. They had the trauma bag in their trucks, or in their personal vehicles. They had the paramedic sticker on, and I can imagine, I actually know this for a fact, but I know it a little bit more in depth because I was a paramedic. I wasn't a firefighter. I wasn't a police officer, but I know that this sort of behavior translates into each of the public safety fields. And Richard Jewell was this in every sense of the word. He was a person who lived for public safety. And the really great thing about these people is the pride that they get from helping their community, from helping people stay safe. And make no mistake, they are frequently wrong. It doesn't make them any better or more skilled than anyone else. They are frequently wrong. They frequently do the wrong things, and they frequently get in trouble. But it always comes from a very good place. Now, when I say they frequently get in trouble, you can probably tell that I'm foreshadowing a little bit here. And I don't even think that's the main point, but yes, Richard Jewell had this past where he had some unfortunate incidents. I guess he was a little overly, shall we say, enthusiastic as a campus police guard or campus security or whatever. He was a little overly enthusiastic with that. He'd go into as the movie portrays, go into dorm rooms without warrants. And in the film, it was also a scene where he gets fired because he's pulling people over, which he shouldn't have been doing. Funny story: when I was in paramedic school, we had a guy who got pulled over, who got fired actually from his job for pulling people over in his personal vehicle. He had one of those little siren flashing lights that you could just attach to the roof of your car, and he was pulling people over with that. So this is a real thing. This isn't. When I saw Richard Jewell the movie, I saw somebody I knew. I mean, this is this is really an archetypal character in terms of public safety, and all of this was interesting because again, the Atlanta Olympics were a big deal in the state of Georgia, and so when this bomb went off, it was very much as if we had all been attacked, and we didn't know who it was, what it was. So we got to know Richard Jewell because Richard Jewell became a media darling after he discovered this bomb, and so at least temporarily. So backing up just a little bit, he was not on the right path to becoming a cop, but he just kept trying. That was his whole goal. And so he did this little rent-a-cop, the security detail for the Olympics. And as I've said before, he's the one who saw the suspicious package. He's the one who cleared the area. And in the morning, after the bombing, he was a hero. He was on the Today Show. He was an absolute hero. Well, for some reason, I guess they wanted to very quickly wrap the thing up. But for some reason, the FBI started looking at Richard Jewell as a suspect. That basically there had been a previous incident in the Olympic Games in Los Angeles where I think a firefighter or somebody had set a bomb off himself, and in order to be the hero of the scene, and the FBI thought, really with zero evidence, that Richard Jewell was the perpetrator of this act. And so they embark on what can only be described as the most disgusting investigation I think I have ever seen, at least I've ever been aware of. So the abuses are just beyond. As an attorney, I can tell you the abuses are beyond anything that I ever thought possible in the United States. Keep that statement in mind, that I ever thought possible in the United States. Because these things happen. They do happen. The problem is us. We just don't think it's possible, but it is. And the U.S. Constitution is quite protective of criminal defendants if you know your Constitution, which is what makes all of this even more, egregious. So one of the first things they did when they decided that Richard Jewell fit this profile was they brought him in under the guise of making a training video. And so they brought him in for questioning, for interrogation, under the guise of that they were making a training video. And this goes to a theme that we have seen actually all the way up until today with, like, for instance, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. It's this whole idea that the FBI can lie to you, but you can't lie to them, which is so... As a civil libertarian kind of person, I mean, if you commit a crime, obviously I want you to be caught. Most people do. But at the same time, Richard Jewell is exactly the reason we have so many strict protections. And so it's a little bit surprising that there is such a thing as the FBI being able to lie to you, but you're not able to lie to them. If you lie to them, it's a crime. But I digress. They bring him in under this guise of making a training video, and they interrogate him without an attorney. And in the process of this thing, they hand them this clipboard, and he's like, well, we got to make this look real. So we just want you to sign this piece of paper saying that we read you your rights. And it's all part of the video. So he goes and he kind of pantomimes signing this thing, and they're like, no, you got to make it look real. And then finally, the alarm bells start going off in Jules' head, and he says, no, I need to get my lawyer. So he calls up his lawyer. It turns out he had worked with this guy years ago when Richard was just in the mailroom, and this lawyer was working for the government, and now he's off on his own. So he calls his lawyer, and his lawyer just hits the roof, and it really the game is on at that point, so to speak. The game is really, you see what's happening. You get the lawyer in there to sort of inject some common sense, I guess, into it, or at least to pull back the shroud of the naivete that Richard Jewell had. And that's just the first thing. The second thing, or not the second thing, but we continue on and we see searches of the apartment where they come through. Richard Jewell was living with his mother. They come through and basically ransack the house right in front of them. Richard Jewell, ever naive, is trying to help them find everything there, even though there's nothing to find. They take her Tupperware, her babysitting stuff. He's got all these guns that he legally owns. They take them all from him. Then they come and they take his hair sample. There's at one point where the lawyer just happens to wander off for a minute, and just the second that he wanders off, the FBI agents are in there, and they're like, okay, here, call this number and tell them that you are, I forget what the line is, but there's a bomb in Centennial Park. You have 30 minutes, I think is the line. He said they want him to say that over and over again as quickly as he can, so they can get a voice imprint to compare it to the voice of the bomber who called and gave the warning before the bomb went off. So they did that until his lawyer finally comes back and says, what are you doing? This is ridiculous. You can't do this. I'm going to sue you. So this thing keeps going, right? And they never get any evidence. And even the media, the first person, and her name was Suggs, her last name was Suggs, I believe she's deceased now. Even the reporter who broke this story, as is portrayed in the movie by trading sexual favors, but I think that is actually under dispute. Who knows? But it is what it is. That's how the movie portrays it. She even goes and does the walk from the payphone to the scene and realizes that it would have been impossible for Richard Jewell to have done that. So the case is really sort of falling apart, but the FBI is still dug in on Richard Jewell. And he very clearly, he's being tried by the media. The media is a big part of this story. And in fact, if you look this up, trial by media is one of the main topics under the Richard Jewell thing. So a lot of this was getting traction. So you have really two tracks in this case. You have the criminal side, which is just exploring every bit of Richard Jewell's life, looking for everything you can possibly imagine that might tie him to this bombing, even though they have no probable cause. They really, honestly, they don't have anything other than he was there and he fit some sort of profile. And then you have the second track that's the media that is running with speculation and leaks and ruining this man's reputation. And I can remember being, again, I was like, I don't know, I was turning 15 that year. So I could have pretty clear memories of this, and I can remember even when Richard Jewell ends up being exonerated, I can remember, I think he's the guy, because it was so convincing. I mean, they had pumped this into us, and at the time, the idea of the media straight up lying to you was so foreign to us. The idea of the FBI, we were a little distrusting of the FBI, for good reason, for Waco, for Ruby Ridge. But we still thought the media was a check on them. We thought the media was meant to keep them in line. So the idea that you had these two forces arrayed against Richard Jewell seemed like it was like they were telling the truth. So they go on, and it becomes clear that the FBI has no evidence with which to charge Richard Jewell. So his lawyer takes him in, to this. It's a great scene in the movie. He takes him into the FBI for questioning, and the FBI's got all this evidence laid out, all these pieces of the park and the phone booth and all this other stuff. It's all laid out in front of him, and they're going to question him, formally question him as a suspect in the Olympic Park bombing. They ask him some questions. He answers them truthfully. He's very convincing, and they keep asking and keep asking. And Richard Jewell finally gets his backbone. He finally sees what's going on. He's not seeing this as some sort of collegial relationship where he's law enforcement and they're law enforcement and they're helping each other solve this case. He finally understands what is happening, and he says, "Do you guys have anything that you can charge me with?" And the FBI agents are just sitting there in silence. Like, literally, do you have anything with which you can charge me? Can you tie me to this at all? As it turns out, the answer was no. I mean, all of this stuff, the money that must have been spent, beyond the money, beyond the taxpayer money, the damage that they did to this man. And he told them, you can follow me all you want. You can keep following me. You can do whatever you want to do. I'm not guilty. And so after this moment, there's some time passed, and there's a scene where the lawyer and Richard are in a diner eating somewhere, and the FBI agent comes up and hands him a letter saying that he's no longer being looked at for the bombing. But the FBI agent still says, "Well, I still think your client's guilty as hell." And of course, as it turns out, Richard Jewell had absolutely nothing to do with this. It was Eric Robert Rudolph who had bombed some, I guess, a lesbian nightclub and some abortion clinics in much the same way. They ended up catching him, I think, in North Carolina after continue doing this. And that was a point Richard made, is like, you're wasting your time. He told this to the FBI directly to their faces. You're wasting your time on me, and you're going to really regret it when this guy strikes again. And I used to think that the FBI was the highest thing that you could do, the highest achievement in law enforcement, and you guys are just harassing me for nothing. You're letting the real bomber go, and it's powerful. It's powerful that Richard Jewell finally gets his backbone and is able to stand up to these guys. So he ends up getting a job at some small town police office. Didn't look the way it was portrayed in the movie. It didn't really look like he was a beat cop or anything. It looked like he might have been a desk surfer, but it's fine. He finally got his wish. He got some libel lawsuits against him. I'm just looking. It looks like NBC paid Richard Jewell $500,000. He settled with the New York Post for an undisclosed amount. CNN settled for an undisclosed amount. Atlanta Journal-Constitution did not settle. And just really quickly looking, looks like they ended up going to an appeal after Richard Jewell died, but the appeals court ruled for the defendant, but the court concluded that because the articles in their entirety were substantially true at the time they were published, even though the investigators' suspicions were ultimately deemed unfounded, they cannot form the basis of a defamation action. So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution actually won that case. And so this is, and Richard Jewell eventually died, I think, in 2007. So it's a sad story, and it's one that paints a very clear picture. Now, what does this have to do with House of Cards? Well, so let's talk about House of Cards. House of Cards, and I'm not going to spend nearly as long on this one because it's not as important. House of Cards is the old show it's on Netflix, and it has Kevin Spacey. Gosh, I forgot his name for a moment. Kevin Spacey. He plays Frank Underwood, and Frank Underwood is your typical Southern Democrat, old style from South Carolina. He talks with a very Southern accent, and he's very aristocratic and all this. And my goodness, What have we here? Very, very stereotypical slimy Southern guy, and and so he's in Congress. He's a House Majority Whip at the start of the show, and without giving away too much, if you haven't seen it, he works his way up from Majority Whip to Vice President to President, eventually to kind of reelected president to former president after he resigns, and his wife actually ends up being the president. So, why am I talking about this? Well, it hit me, the relationship of these two things, because you have one that's a real story, a real life story. Richard Jewell's life is true. And you have House of Cards that is not true. It's fiction. I believe it's based in reality, some of it, but that's a different topic. But you have two arms of the federal government power apparatus. You have the top arm and the bottom arm. So you have the one giving the order and the ones actually carrying out the order. And so what I thought about this was you have people in positions of power. They are always going to perform in such a way as to expand their renown, to expand their power, to expand their authority. They're always going to be acting in self-interest when you give someone power. As the old saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so through House of Cards, you see this president, this man who would become president, using both the law enforcement apparatus, the military apparatus, all of this to pursue political ends and also personal ends. But when in this show, what they're depicting is that at that level, political and personal become irretrievably intertwined. So you have this at a very high level, and you have the Richard Jewell thing with the FBI going after this innocent man, and they're doing the same things. They're relentlessly pursuing something to the detriment of the innocents around them. And also, as a side note, both Frank Underwood in House of Cards and the FBI agents at the very bottom of this pyramid that transists from fictional at House of Cards at the top to real FBI at the bottom with Richard Jewell, both ends of this pyramid were using the media as its puppets to get done what it needed to be done. And what struck me, what made me make this realization, is there was a line in the movie Richard Jewell in which the lawyer is over at the house and with Richard, and they realize that the house is bugged. Right, the lawyer's assistant, who would later become his wife, came over to the house and wrote a note saying, "This house is bugged. Our office is bugged. Be careful." And Richard looks at this note and they start looking around at the ceilings once they realize they're being listened to, and they say, "How?" And Richard says, "How can they do this? Or can they do this? Or how could they possibly do this?" And the lawyer says, "It's easy. You don't matter." That was such a powerful line. I mean, think about it. It's true. It's true. Richard Jewell was lost in this pursuit of power, of success by this FBI agent. Because let me tell you something. To be an FBI agent, you have to be every bit as ruthless and ambitious as Frank Underwood in House of Cards. You're just starting at a lower level. You're just not being elected. So in a lot of ways, the FBI agents are actually on the track to become what we call now the deep state. They are the ones who are in the government. They never leave. They survive from administration to administration, and a lot of people say that these people are the ones with the real power. This FBI agent was just a field agent somewhere, but guarantee you he was looking at GS-14, GS-15, these pay grades, getting promoted, going to Washington, and being set for life, because it's a plum job once you get up in there. But it reminded me of the line when he said, "Well, you don't matter." It reminded me of the line, very similar line, where on House of Cards, where Frank Underwood's walking out and there's this homeless man who's just screaming at the top of his lungs. He's obviously very upset at something Frank has done and is protesting in some sort of way. But he gets arrested and they handcuff him to, I think, a pole or something, or maybe they just handcuff him and sit him down or whatever. And he's not even saying articulate words. He's just like, you can't hear him. And Frank, he's grizzled. He looks like some kind of Neanderthal man. And Frank kneels down in front of him, looks him dead in the eye, and says, "Nobody can hear you. Nobody cares. Nothing will come of this." And he stands up and he walks away. And the guy is just sitting there, awestruck at what had happened. This very powerful man coming, telling him, "You don't matter. All of this, you're worked up, you're upset, you're thrashing in the streets, and you don't matter." So, what does all of this have to do with life as we know it right now? There's one thing that I think that the people of the United States can agree upon, and that is the distrust of the government. But the caveat there is, we seem to trust our government when our people are in charge, but we seem to distrust the government when the other side is in charge. And so right now, where we are with this sort of this sort of limbo between two presidents, we have possibly Biden coming in, but that's still very much up in the air. Notably, Kamala Harris, and I've actually been saying this for a while, notably, Kamala Harris has not resigned her Senate seat. You would think that she would, so that a new senator could be appointed and participate in the lame duck and the selection of leadership and all that, but no, she's not resigned. But we're in limbo between these two presidents, and you can really see it. You have the Trump supporters taking shots across over at the office, quote unquote, office of the president-elect. You have the Biden people saying, "Well, Biden's our president now." It's crazy. It's crazy. So the end result, I guess, if you want to look at it, is we all trust our government right now, but we have two different ones that we can trust. I don't know. I don't know exactly how that works. But I think we do that against our better judgment. As I mentioned, we had a lot of reasons to distrust our government in the 1990s. You had the incident at Ruby Ridge, where I believe it was the FBI, essentially executed a man's family because he wouldn't come out. It was some little small thing, and they got the idea that he was radicalized by Rush Limbaugh or talk radio or some nonsense, and soldier of fortune and all this, and they killed his dog, his wife, his son, I think. Then you go to Waco, which part of the reason David Koresh at Waco had so many weapons was because of Ruby Ridge. And as I've thought about this over the years, I've come to the conclusion that I really don't think whatever was going on, I mean, if he really was sexually abusing children, I mean, obviously that's bad. Obviously that should have been stopped. But there doesn't appear to be any actual evidence for that. And so when you have the FBI, the ATF saying this, and they're really trying to make this guy look bad, you have to take that with a grain of salt. This was Janet Reno, after all. So you have to take it with a grain of salt. And Bill Clinton. I mean, and this standoff went off for a long time and ended up in the incineration of many, many, many innocent people at the hands of the U.S. government. Then you had the Oklahoma City bombing, which, case closed. Timothy McVeigh did it, but there's still a lot of, I think, questions about it that are up in the air. Then you had the bombing at the Olympic Park, and then you had 9/11. which all of these things, a lot of questions. We have a lot of really, really good reasons to question our government, as we should, but we should have been doing that all along. That's the problem. And so I just wonder, people say conspiracy theories, and I'm not a big conspiracy theory guy. I'm just not. But I do at least accept that there may be a truth beyond what I know, at least in terms of the government. Does that mean I believe in a conspiracy? See, I don't like the conspiracy theory thing, because it was, the term conspiracy theory was actually created by the government to discredit people who questioned it. And if you're not always questioning your government, then you're not doing the right thing. People often point to 1963 and the assassination of John F. Kennedy, when people started to question their government. And I think that it's a little bit silly that it took almost 200 years for people to start questioning their government. You could make the argument that some of that was happening in the Civil War, but that really was a different chapter. So it really should have started for the modern era during the Roosevelt administration, perhaps Woodrow Wilson. Nevertheless, if you're not questioning your government, you're doing the wrong thing. And why do I say that? Why? Because the government is made up of people. The government is made up of people. The Founding Fathers knew the proclivities and the potentials of people. They knew people could be extraordinarily good, but they also knew people could be extraordinarily bad. That's why they made 3 branches of the federal government to check each other. That's why they made the Congress bicameral, where you have a House and a Senate. That's why they gave very specific jobs to each branch of government in an attempt to serve as a guard against the worst impulses of people. It's why our system is a republic. Look at how the country is oriented. In other words, look at how we elect our federal officials. The federal government was never meant to be primary in our lives. That is the farthest seat of power away from the individual. You can think of the power orientation as the way that it's meant to be, is that the individual is the most powerful person. I have the most power over my life, and I consent to government in some degree. I consent. Where do I consent to? Do I consent to Washington? No, I consent to my local city. I follow the city's rules. And then, to some degree, I consent to the county. I consent further off to the state. The state, then, if you look at it, except for the House of Representatives in the original formulation, the only thing I can consent to the federal government is very limited by the Constitution. And in the way it's formulated, the only say I have in the federal government is the House of Representatives. That's it. The original Constitution. That's exactly how it was. So you actually have the people, we the people, the states, and the federal government. We're all separate parties. And so the power base is as close to me as it can be. I'm supposed to be able to call up my local official. I can't call up the president and say, hey, I've got a pothole. Can you come fix it? That doesn't make any sense. If I call up my local city councilman, hey, there's a pothole in front of my house. He may or may not do anything about it, but at least he's here and he's somewhat responsive to me. I can't expect the president to come fix a pothole. And the founders knew that. And so the founders made it to where we the people only elected representatives every 2 years. That was our voice. The states had a voice in the government, in the federal government, by electing senators. And the president is elected by electors, which is a mix of the state and the people. And so you see just layer upon layer of protections that were brought in. I think it's the 17th Amendment that actually takes away the requirement that senators are elected by the state legislatures and sends it to a direct vote. I think that's silly. I think that was a mistake because it just makes senators and representatives are just the same thing, essentially. Senators were supposed to represent the states because the idea is that states' interests are a little bit different than individual interests. And that's okay. That's perfectly normal. I think there was some corruption going on, and that's part of the reason they changed it. I think it needs to go back to the way it was. That would stop a lot of this divided Congress because our country is made up the way it is. We're typically more red than blue. And so the Senate would pretty much always be red, whereas the House is, kind of looking like it might be leaning a little blue. It's a Democrat majority right now. They lost a lot of seats, but I don't know. It's hard for the Republicans to get a majority in the House. I'll just say that. But the founders set all this up to check the worst impulses of people. Because really, no matter what, people are always going to act in their self-interest. There may be some exceptions. There are, I'm sure. Perhaps parents of children don't act in their self-interest. Was Richard Jewell acting in his self-interest? No. But these are different situations. When you put yourself into a career where you are a public servant, two things are competing with each other. First of all, your own personal ambition, because you have it. That's part of being in a career. I don't care if you start out working at Sears or in the FBI. Both of you are going to have your own ambitions. And how is that going to... Some people are more ambitious than others. Some people go in thinking they're going to go straight to the top. Some people just aren't even aware of their ambition until their coworker over here who got hired 2 months after them get a promotion before they do. I mean, the ambition's there. It's always there. So you have, in public safety, you have that ambition mixed with the idea that you want to help your community, and it's a balance. And by the way, it's also true in politics. It's in any sort of public servant type role. Public servants, I typically think, are more selfless, but you do have those who are quite ambitious. And you can tell them. You can tell who they are the minute you meet them, because in public safety. In politics, I think the balance is a little bit off. I think a lot of people talk the public service game, but it's really the ambition game. I think when the House of Representatives and the Senate get together, you have 535 people who all consider themselves future presidents. I mean, I really think that's what happens. You have a meeting of 535 future presidents. I think that's what happens, and it's okay. But that's natural. It's human nature. Everyone with any ambition projects towards the top of whatever they do. It's just a matter of, it's not that they don't want it. It's just a matter of how much they want to work for it. But when you see these empty house sessions where the great congressman from the 2nd District of Missouri is in here congratulating little Miss Susie Jones for winning the best looking horse at the county fair. This is a real thing. They spend time doing that. Just know that he's doing that, saying these are my dues that I'm paying to get to the next thing. So when you have people who are using public safety and public concern, public service to pursue their ambition, you must expect that the certain amount of ruthlessness is going to come through, and it's going to redound to innocents like Richard Jewell. And you see that perfectly portrayed in House of Cards. Literally everyone in House of Cards with whom Frank and Carrie Underwood? Not Carrie Underwood. What's her name? Oh gosh, I've forgotten her name. Claire. Carrie Underwood is a country's... Claire Underwood is her name, but everyone they come in contact with is destroyed. You know, the guy whose barbecue joint he really loved at the beginning of the show, gone. All of these people's careers are just gone, just flush. They're fired, they're pushed out, some of them are killed. There's nobody with whom that they interact that isn't just destroyed. And it's all in the pursuit of their power. And so that's the parallel. You're just seeing it at two different levels. You're seeing it at the presidential level, using people at the FBI like the ones who went after Richard Jewell, but the goals are all the same. The goals are the expansion of power. The expansion of power. Because as you move up in the FBI, you get more powerful. You get closer to that deep state. And if you're president, the expansion of power means never leaving office. And it's interesting. It's interesting. But this is why we should always be questioning the government, because the idea that they're going to Washington just to serve you, or going to Tallahassee or Atlanta or wherever your state capital is, just to serve you is silly. Lose it. You gotta forget that right now. Some of them I think do care, but again, it's a balance. It's what can I do for you to get me where I want to go? It's really how it acts. It's almost as if your car wants to go to the mountains, say, and so it willingly takes you to the place you want to go, but if you don't take it to the mountains, it's unhappy. It's just a vehicle. You are a vehicle for the politician, and that's human nature. It's okay. I don't care if you're AOC. I don't care if you're Barack Obama. You all have ambition. And this is actually what makes Donald Trump just a little bit different, because you have people who broker in power, like the politicians, and Donald Trump really doesn't broker in power. He brokers in money, which means that he is predictable, he's understandable, he's very easy to understand. He's also not in pursuit of constant power. Now he wants to do his second term, for sure. He wants to finish what he set out to do. But I really don't see much of an upside. Maybe he wants his place in history. I don't know. There is certainly an ambition part of him, and I don't want to discount that. But I think in terms of the balance, ambition versus the seeking of power, I think the presidency is actually kind of a down step for him. He was a powerful television presence. He won't be anymore. He won't be able to go back on television. Not on The Apprentice, not the way he was. After this, I think it was a step down for him. He took a pay cut for sure. He wasn't even taking any salary. So I think that's what makes him a little bit different. That balance of ambition versus wanting to forward the common good. It's a little bit out of whack with him, and that's part of the reason I'm grateful for him. That's part of the reason he's difficult for a lot of people to understand, is that balance is just not the same. Whereas you look at your typical politician, and I don't care if they're Republican, Democrat, whoever, you look at your typical politician, and that ambition is certainly the heavier of the two factors. Sometimes you get philosophy that kicks in there. You get that a lot with the libertarians, where it's almost like they don't care about ambition or the common good. They just care about forwarding a philosophy. It's an ideological thing, and it's weird, and that's why you should avoid the Libertarian Party. It's okay if you have libertarian thoughts and proclivities, but you should avoid the Libertarian Party, because there's really no concern for the people in there. And I think that we see that in some of the politicians who are in government or who aspire to government, that they're really more interested in being ideologically pure than being effective. So You should avoid them. Again, it's fine to think it's fine to think libertarian things. It's fine to agree with some of their points, but avoid the libertarians altogether. So, in conclusion, just to wrap all of this up, it's a good thing to distrust your government. You should not limit that to when the other side is in power, though. You should distrust your government all the time, because guess what? It really doesn't matter. If you're Richard Jewell, it really doesn't matter who the president is. That agent that's hounding you, that's trying to jam you up on a criminal charge, he's still going to be there. Again, this is what we call the deep state. These are the career civil servants that never change. Doesn't matter if it's Washington, yeah. If it's Washington, George Washington, it doesn't matter if it's George Washington, if it's Barack Obama, if it's George Bush, if it's Donald Trump, if it's Bill Clinton. That guy is still there as long as he's alive, and as long as he's not eligible for retirement, he's going to be there, and he's going to be doing his thing, and he's going to be trying to close these cases, and he's going to run over whoever the hell he needs to run over in order to do it. So who is president doesn't matter, okay? Stop with this, we're going to trust the FBI, because that's how they get away with things. We're going to trust the FBI, we're going to trust the CIA, we're going to trust the IRS, as long as our guy's in power. But when they're not, boy, they need to be reformed. No, they always need to be reformed. They always need to be reformed. The fact that we have Ruby Ridge, Waco, Richard Jewell, the failures to pick up on the attacks on 9/11, all within a 10-year span, shows some big problems. And there were some reform actions for sure. But look at what's happened since then. Look at what's happened since then. The FBI, CIA, NSA, they all seem to have been arrayed against a president. Somebody explain that to me, because I don't understand it. They thought he was a Russian agent. Okay, well, it should have taken, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes to figure out that he wasn't. Most of us knew he wasn't. So, are they doing good for the country when they become tools of political power? No. And I actually think there's a strong case that federal law enforcement should not exist. It was not ever contemplated by the founders, and if you believe that the founders' vision for the country was correct, and the more we monkey with it, the worse it gets, I agree with you. But here we are, we have the FBI, and it is what it is. So, and the CIA, I think the CIA definitely needs to be rebranded. There's so much junk that's gone on with the CIA. Just the parts that we know about is just unbelievable. It's unbelievable that this is the United States of America. If you ever want something good to research, look at the CIA, how it was created, how John F. Kennedy promised to dismantle it. Eisenhower said it was the worst thing, and it just all the stuff they were doing, they were going and overthrowing governments, and it's just really bad stuff. I mean, the CIA was out there fighting in Afghanistan alongside Al-Qaeda, what would become Al-Qaeda and the Taliban during the 80s when the Russians invaded. All because we figured the enemy of our enemy is our friend. Well, that really didn't work out so well. So, this is all done in your name, people. All of this is done in your name. When Obama drones a children's hospital, that's done in your name. I just want you to keep that in mind. When a roadside bomb takes off the legs of one of our young men in uniform, or one of our young women in uniform, that's done in your name. They're there in your name. So what I hope you've seen from this is just the absolute range of things that are all done in your name, supposedly. But if you speak up, if you cry out, you sound like nothing but noise to them, and they will treat you, if you even draw their attention, they will kneel down into your face and look you in the eye and say, nobody can hear you. Nobody cares. Nothing will come of this. So think about that as you are in your weekend repose, as you're some nice cheery thoughts. But it's not meant to depress you. It's not meant to make you feel hopeless or helpless. It's meant to invigorate you and to seek to at least show you what is out there, and to hopefully frame it a little bit better so that when Donald Trump or whoever it is that you like is in office, you don't stop fighting. You don't stop fighting, because you don't stop fighting. If the IRS needs reform under Barack Obama, the IRS needs reform under Donald Trump. If the CIA needs reform under Barack Obama, the CIA needs reform under Donald Trump. We should not stop fighting for these things, lest we become Richard Jewell, lest we become the screaming man on the street who doesn't matter. So that's it. Thank you. This first episode of the Weekend Repose, of the Connect Your Audio Weekend Repose. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll come back and listen again next weekend when we do this all over again. And also for the regular show during the week. So it's a brand new podcast. We're figuring it all out, right? So I'm thinking probably the 5 weekly episodes during the week, and then the 1 weekend repose, and we'll take Sunday off, as I hope you do as well. I hope you get to do that. When I was in public safety, I didn't get to take Sundays off, so I hope you get to. So if you like what you've heard, I hope you'll tell your friends, tell your neighbors. We conservatives, we need to stick together, and we need to fight together against all of these things that are against us. But I hope you'll tell your friends, and you'll like, and you'll share, and you'll subscribe, and you'll tweet about it, and you'll follow me at Twitter telling me how you think of things are going. I'm at David Gregors. I'm on Parler at David J. Gregors. I don't use Parler very much, but I know a lot of people do. We just keep growing and growing, and I'm so thankful for all of your support. We're on iTunes now. We're on Spotify. Just tell your friends. Tell everybody. We want everyone to listen. So until next time, be safe, be well, and God bless.